Howdy folks, this is Jesse Allen from Galesburg, Illinois, USA, and this week I am going to be discussing different configurations for your amp envelope in a synthesizer. Now, the first configuration I want to talk about is a sustaining configuration, which will more approximate the sound of a blown or bowed instrument, such as different types of horns in the case of the blown instruments, or like a violin or cello in the case of the bowed instruments. And I have a sustaining configuration set up right here in my amp envelope, and you have the basic parameters: attack time, decay time, sustain level, and release time. And you can see that the basic settings here in the graphic, and that'll sound something like this. A few important things to remember about this configuration is you usually want your sustain level somewhere between about 50 and 90%, and you want your attack time, decay time, and release times to be relatively low. Now, if you want a punchier sound, you can decrease the decay times and attack times, so you get a punchier sound that way. The next configuration I want to talk about is a switch configuration. You can think of this kind of like, say, a Hammond organ, where if you hit the key on an organ, it immediately will hit that 100% sustain level amplitude, and then when you release the key, the sound stops pretty much immediately, kind of like a switch. The most important thing to remember here is have your sustain all the way up at 100%, and the attack and release times to be very low, like nearly zero. And I say nearly zero because sometimes if you put it down all the way to zero, you might get some clicks or noises at the beginning and the ends of the notes. So it's generally a good idea to have at least a little bit of attack time. But here's what this would sound like. As you can see down here, you can see when I'm holding down the note and when I release the note. Now, the next configuration that I'm going to talk about, or the next couple configurations, are some more percussive configurations, or configurations, you get from like plucked instruments, or like struck instruments, such as like a lot of stringed instruments, like piano is actually a stringed instrument, or a guitar. And with those, you initially hit the note, and you will hold it, and eventually it will kind of fade out on its own. And the most important configuration to remember here is have your sustain level all the way down at zero, have your attack and release times to be fairly short, and the decay time, kind of varies, just depends on how long you want the note to kind of ring out. So let's hear how this sounds. And as you hear, as I was holding the note, it faded out. Now, what happens if we release the note before the decay time is, run through its decay phase? Here's what will happen. See, the note pretty much stops almost immediately. That's because this release time is set real low. Generally, whenever you release a note, that's when the release time starts. You take your finger off the key, goes to the release time. Now, another configuration is kind of a more standard percussive or plucked configuration. And the only difference between this one and the previous one is you will have your decay time and release time set about the same. So it doesn't matter if I hold down the note or if I hit the note real fast. It will last, the note will hang on about the same amount of time either way. Now, the last configuration I want to talk about is a quark configuration. And the professor for my music production class, a guy by the name of Loudon Stearns, apparently just stumbled upon this configuration kind of by accident. The important things to note about this configuration is you want your sustain level at zero, the attack and decay times to be really short, and you want your release time to be, fairly long. And if I just hit the note and hold it down, you'll see that I just got kind of a little blip there. However, if I hit the note very quickly, you could see that it kind of fades out over time. And that's because, like I said earlier, whenever you take your finger off the key, that's when the release time is going to start. So if I hit the note really quickly, I'm taking my finger off the note in the middle of the attack and decay phase, and I've got that kind of visualized in this graphic by the white line that you see there. And I'm not really sure in what musical context you'd use this. Even our professor said he's never really found any use for this particular configuration, but it does show a interesting kind of quirk, if you will, about the amp envelope. So that pretty much covers it. I'm going to go ahead and put up the graphics for all these different configurations so you can copy them down and play around with them a little bit in your own synthesizers. And keep in mind, as is with anything in music, these are just kind of suggestions or jumping off points. You're going to want to, play around with the settings and adjust them as needed for your musical needs. So that pretty much covers it. I'd like to thank you all for viewing my video. So thanks and rock on, folks.